Hello and welcome to the supplement on TWR-UK. I'm James Maidment-Fullard. Coming up on the programme today, we'll be joined by three authors who'll be telling us about their latest books. In just a moment, we'll be hearing from Andy Robinson, the author of the book The Big C in Me, Life, Hope and Faith on the Road Through Cancer. He'll be talking to us about his faith in the midst of his terminal diagnosis. We'll also be joined by Niki Hardy. She'll be telling us how wrestling with her doubts helped her to solidify her faith. And Ted Turnau will be with us to talk about the role of Christians in creative culture making. That will be a fascinating conversation about how we can build bridges and heal rift in ways that might no longer welcome Christian commitment. You've got all of that to look forward to today. But first of all, we have the privilege of hearing from someone whose story is as honest as it is hope-filled. Andy Robinson is a husband, father, grandfather, leader, and the author of The Big C in Me, a book born not out of theory but out of the raw reality of living with terminal cancer. What makes Andy's voice so compelling isn't just the diagnosis he carries, but the way he's chosen to live in the middle of it, with courage, clarity, humour, and a faith that refuses to look away from the hard questions. Instead of asking why me, Andy has leaned into what now, and that shift has shaped everything from his relationships to the creation of Waymaker International, the charity his book now supports. Andy, thank you so much for being with us on the programme today. We're so glad that you're here. When you first heard those words, "you have cancer," what was the first thought that genuinely went through your mind?
I think that's always a tough one because I think so much comes flying through your mind. It's almost like time stands still a little bit in that moment, and everything comes flooding in. But I think the honest question was, how am I gonna tell people? Was that how do I tell my kids? How do I tell my grandkids? How does that work? Which may seem a strange thing to think about, but it wasn't that kind of what does this mean for me right now? It was just much more, "Oh, this is really going to upset everybody," and that was, I would say probably the first thought, closely followed by, why is this happening? Why me? All of those kind of things come flooding in very, very quickly in that first moment.
Where are you at now in your cancer journey?
Okay, so I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer straight away, which had metastasized, which means it just spread already to my liver and to my lungs. So that was the kind of prognosis from day one, that it was terminal, that it was what they call treatable, not curable. So that means that they'll never cure me, but they can treat me and keep me alive for as long as possible. So initially, they gave me 2 to 3 years to live from January 2023. And I can see you kind of doing the mental gymnastics right now to work out that, hold on a minute, that ended at the end of last year, which it did. And I'm doing very, very well. So by the grace of God, through lots of prayer and lots of medicines and surgeries, which I've been through many, I'm in the situation now where there is no identifiable cancer in my bowel, which is where it started. There is no longer any identifiable cancer in my liver. And I've just got some spots on my lungs. And 6 weeks ago, I had lung surgery on my left lung, which was successful. And next week, I start some radiotherapy on my right lung, which is to address the final small tumor that is in there. So I'm not out of the woods yet. And as far as the oncology team is concerned, I'll never be out of the woods. I'll just be, in a situation where they call no evidence of disease. But I feel back to normal in many ways, that I haven't had any chemo for over a year. So in terms of that kind of horrible chemo feeling, and if anybody's had that, they'll know just that, the whole chemo brain, chemo fog, all of that kind of stuff has gone. So I'm doing well, and I'm feeling good and very, very hopeful at this point.
Well, it's really encouraging to hear your story. In the book, there was a line that I ended up highlighting in your book, which was you wrote that there was a shift from why me, the question that we all want to ask at times, to what now? What did that transition look like internally for you? Was it a, a moment or was it a long wrestle for you to start asking those questions?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think you know it's an inevitable question, the why me question. Whether you're a Christian or not, I think that it's inevitable that you're gonna end up in that why me world. And I did, and it was a wrestle to kind of go through it, because often our theology is usually built in not in suffering. It's built outside of suffering. So almost my theology on suffering was built from outside of suffering. And it's not until you're in suffering that you suddenly realize, hold on, does that really stack up? And for me, I had to go through that process, because there's that sense of, well, why has God given me cancer? Has God given me cancer? And that's a big theological question, that I kind of wrestled with, and came out the other side of like, no, God hasn't given me cancer. He can't give me what he hasn't got. He's a good God. And cancer is a result of the fall. We live in a fallen world. And as a result, bad things happen, to good people. And as Christians, we're a chosen nation, a royal priesthood, but we're not a protected species. We still suffer the results of the fall. And so I kind of was going through that process, and I asked God, why me? And the question, as I was processing, that I came to was, well, why not me? And that was an interesting step, in that sense of, what is it that I would hold up about myself before God, if you like, to say, well, what makes me so exceptional that I don't deserve this, or I deserve it less than this that person? And then we run into all sorts of problems around grace and all of that kind of stuff. And you think, no, I live in a fallen world, and bad things happen to good people. So, I mean, that was a question I was asked on my TikTok channel. In fact, I always give an honest update and finish with, but God is good all the time. And someone said to me, well, I can't reconcile how a good God could give good people cancer. And the conversation then ensued, which was two questions that I asked back, which was, one, what makes you think God gave me cancer? And two, what makes you think I'm good? And I think it's processing those things. And part of that journey, I was actually reading a book on the Holocaust. And it's an amazing book called The Choice, by a lady who survived, and she became a psychologist. And one of the things she observed was that the people that survived the mental anguish of Auschwitz and other places was that they refused to be a victim. And she said, if they're constantly asking why me, it produces that kind of victim mentality, that life is happening to me and that I'm not in any kind of control. And she said those that survived were the ones that asked, what now? And that really stuck with me, and was then part of my process of coming to say, okay, well, I don't believe God's given me cancer. I live in a fallen world. I've got sick, and I can actually die on the inside, I think, is a phrase that I've come to use. And I've met lots of people, sadly in cancer units and places where literally the minute they hear that diagnosis, they curl up and die on the inside. And basically they're just waiting to die. And I refuse to be like that. And so I really kind of camped out on that. So what now?
Can I ask you a quick question then, for anybody that might be listening to this who has faced a diagnosis similar to yours and they feel like they're basically in God's waiting room, they've died on the inside, what would you say to them? Can they overcome that?
Absolutely, they can. The reality is that that there is a peace available. The Bible talks about a peace that passes understanding, and for me, that just happened supernaturally. Literally, the moment the consultant told me that I had cancer, there was just this sense of peace that came. Um, and that was supernatural for me. For others, it's because we pursue it. But the reality is that peace, Jesus offered us peace. He said, I'm going to give you peace, not that this world offers, but the peace I offer you is different. And that's been my reality, and that's available to all of us, because the peace that the world offers is the absence of things. So in order for you to have peace in this world, it will be the absence of poverty, the absence of debt, the absence of chaos in your life, the absence of anxiety. That's the peace that the world offers. But the peace that Jesus offers, not like the world does, the peace that Jesus offers is the presence of something, or more to the point, someone, him, the Prince of Peace. And so I think there's that's the process. I would look to pursue that. And I think I touch on this in the book, is actually we have to protect our hearts, our mind, and our soul, and our bodies, our strength. And I use that a lot to kind of process that whole element of understanding, and really to dig into scripture in a different way. I found reading my Bible a very different experience since I've been diagnosed, if I'm really honest, because again, I think your theology on suffering is forged in suffering in a different way. And as I've read the scriptures, and you read verses that I'm sure you've read 1,000 times before I had, that God numbered my days before the creation of the world. Now, we read it in Psalms, and so it's a little bit poetic. Is it just a little bit of a nice kind of cliche? But the reality is that true? Because if that is true, then cancer cannot steal one day from the number that God has set. And that is where I then sat. I thought, no, God's word is true. And that if he's determined the number of my days, and cancer's not going to steal one of those, then I need to live those days well. I need to live those days for him, however many or however few. And again, I think I was reading Steve Jobs' autobiography, and he says something in there, not a believer as far as I know, but he says something in there that just really kind of made me think. He said, one day will be your last day, and if you knew that today was your last day, would you do what you've got in your diary to do? And if the answer to that question is no, too many days in a row, then something needs to change. And I think for me, living in that kind of heightened awareness that my days are numbered by God, yes, but nonetheless, He is, He's given those days to me, and so I need to very clearly live them for Him.
If you just joined us, our guest today is Andy Robinson. He's the author of the book, The Big C in Me, Life, Hope and Faith on the Road Through Cancer. Andy, how do you hold the tension between praying for healing and accepting a terminal diagnosis without feeling like you're betraying either hope or reality?
Wow, that's a great question, and a very big one. I think it's again, you're exploring the realities of your theology, your understanding. But for me, I mean, I was asked often, and certainly at the beginning, have you got faith for your healing? And I think probably I shocked many people when I said no. Um, because if, as Hebrews 11 verse 1 tells us if faith is the assurance of things hoped for, and the word hope there doesn't mean, I hope it doesn't rain tomorrow. It's that kind of, how do they put it? It's kind of a confident expectation. So faith is the absolute assurance of a confident expectation. And so I don't have an assurance that God will heal me. I have a confident expectation that he can heal me. And so I kind of live in that, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego world where, when they were going to be put into the fiery furnace, and basically they said, our God is well able to save us. But even if he doesn't, we'll not bow down and worship your idol. Well, that's where I sit. My God is well able to heal me. But even if he doesn't, I will worship him and live every day I've got for him, because he's numbered those days. And so that's kind of really how I hold that tension is that I believe God can heal me supernaturally. I pray for it. I join many people. I have, a wonderful group of people I call my weekly warriors who come and meet with me every week and pray through, the things that are ahead in terms of medical stuff, but pray for my healing as well. And we pray believing God is a God who heals today. And I have every confidence that God can. I've seen him do it. Do I know he will for me? No. But I have a confident expectation that he can. And that's where I live. He's well able. But even if he doesn't, I'll still worship him and declare his goodness.
Andy, just as we begin to bring this program to a close, you've written this book now. People are going to know you as the man that is going through a terminal cancer diagnosis. How do you make sure that your identity doesn't become the cancer patient? How do you keep your identity rooted in Christ?
Yeah, well, again, another good question. I ask my friends to help me as well, and again, I'd encourage people, in your churches, if you're around people that have got this kind of diagnosis hanging out, by all means ask them how they're doing, but be willing to accept I'm okay and let that go. But don't make that the only question you ask them. Ask them how family is, ask them if they're working, how work is, those kind of things. For me, there's that verse, isn't there, that talks about, it says, to live is Christ, to die is gain. And I've had to go through those mental hoops. I've had to come to that point of I'm okay with death. God's numbered those days, and if he calls me home, I'm okay with that. But actually, I feel like the emphasis is on the first part of the verse, not the last part of the verse. The emphasis on to live is Christ. So what now? And so for me, that what now was very much about continuing the work of my charity that I'd set up. That was a bit of a kind of sideline, if you like. For me, I was employed as a pastor. I came out of that and focused really on Waymaker. All the proceeds from the book are going to build a clinic in Africa, because when I was last there, which was a while ago now, because I've not been able to travel, I asked an African, I said, well, what's your health system like? Thinking like NHS. And he said, well, we trust God or die. And, I've joked about that a little bit, in as much as once I had my terminal diagnosis, I'd moved across to the African health system. I was trust God or die. And so, what keeps me alive on the inside is focusing on what God's given me to do and what he's given me skills to do. And one of the things I've been able to do is raise funds and build schools and various things in Africa to serve the poor there. And so I just wanted this book to finance building a clinic, so that, like me, I have a choice. I believe for the best of Jesus and the best of medicine. And I'm able to do that, whereas in Africa and some of those places, they don't have that. And so I'd love to build something that gives them hope, where they can say, we're believing for the best of medicine and the best of Jesus, just like I have. And And so, and again, that's what keeps me alive on the inside. It's something that focuses me outside of what's going on in my body. And there are days when it's really hard, when you're on chemo or you're really feeling low, or you've had I've had many failed operations and things that have gone wrong. And I don't want you or anybody listening to think like, Andy's bouncing around on cloud nine all the time. Really, really not. Been down some very dark rabbit holes and some days of quite difficult, genuinely the valley of the shadow of death. But I think it's important that we navigate those things, but not stay there. And what keeps me alive on the inside is focusing on what God's still given me to do in the days that I've got left.
Just finally, then, Andy, and I apologise for the difficult, reflective question that I'm going to throw at you right now, but if you could sit with your pre-diagnosis self for 5 minutes, what would you say?
Actually, that's a really easy question to answer. What I would say is tomorrow's not guaranteed, my friend. So don't live like it is. Because without a doubt, I was living my life like I had many tomorrows. I had every day available. I could plan what I was going to do for the next 25 years. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think, don't live like you're guaranteed or entitled, probably more to the point, to tomorrow, because none of us are.
Andy Robinson has been our guest today. He's the author of the book, The Big C in Me, Life, Hope and Faith on the Road Through Cancer. Andy, thank you very much for joining us today.
Been my absolute pleasure. Thanks.
This is The Supplement on TWR-UK. Up next, we're joined by Ted Turnau, cultural analyst, teacher and author of Popologetics. Ted has spent decades helping Christians move beyond fear, suspicion or shallow consumption of popular culture and instead approach it with curiosity, discernment and grace. His new book, Oasis of Imagination, pushes that vision even further. It's a call for Christians to become creators of oases, imaginative spaces where truth, beauty and rest can be encountered in the midst of a noisy, polarized world. Rather than fighting culture or hiding from it, Ted invites us into a richer, more hopeful way of engaging, one shaped by creativity, hospitality, and a deeply biblical understanding of the imagination. I'm excited to talk about some of that with him today. Ted Turnau, thank you for being with us. You argue in your book that Christians often default to either culture warring or retreating into a Christian bubble. What convinced you that there's a better way?
Oh, gosh, that's a huge question. I think growing up in the evangelical church in the United States, and having that kind of culture warring mentality for a good part of my life, it just, well, I think maybe moving to Prague, maybe moving outside of the United States and watching from outside how divisive and ultimately destructive, and how delegitimizing it was to the gospel. Like, I think Americans are less inclined to the gospel after 30 or 40 years of culture warring than they were before. And also, I think the Christian bubble is, as I read the Bible, is just not compatible with Jesus' command that we go out into the world. And I see a lot of that also in the States and to some extent in the UK as well. Just a an attempt to keep the world at bay to protect me and mine, and that sort of tribal protection, putting self and family first, also seems to me to run very much counter to the call of the gospel to be for others. Like, Christianity is very much an other-centric religion. What are we supposed to do? Love God, love others. Hard to do that when you're putting up walls. So, and I get the fear that motivates that, but I think a posture of perpetual fear and anxiety from Christians doesn't say a whole lot about our trust in God either. So all around, I think removing myself from my own cultural milieu and being able to view it from the outside did wonders, and being able to view the UK culture from outside. Um, I taught in Wales for a little bit occasionally, and got to rub shoulders with Welsh people, and and spoke occasionally in the UK. So both of those, I think, an outsider's perspective really helps. And reading the Bible more carefully than I had in my youth.
So, Ted, if you were to try and summarize the biblical mandate for engaging culture in just a few sentences, how would you do it?
Mm. Uh, just a few sentences. I've just written 400 pages, so just a few sentences. Um, I would say God calls us to go and rule over his creation with care and in an attitude of worship towards him, love towards each other, stewardship towards the earth, and see what kind of good we can do with that, knowing that God created the world good, that the image of God uh, lives in us, and is and creativity of good things is possible. That there's common grace, and good things are being created even by those who don't share our faith, so who have a different faith or none, and that sets the stage for being able to create into culture and to receive works of culture, uh, and have that be an arena of mutual benefit, common good, rather than a war zone.
Who do you see as the best biblical examples of people who've done this well?
Hmm. Well, I mean, in the Old Testament, um, Bezalel and Aholiab, they were creating the temple, um, but that was very much a this is for Israel, this is for the worshiping community, rather than really trying uh, to move over into the nations, as Israel was called to do, be a light of the nations. I don't know. I think maybe a guy named Jesus did it really, really well. I mean, he's not generally thought of as a culture former, but if you look at his career, short though it was, um, he was an incisive cultural critic. He was a master storyteller. He was able to bridge divides. He dealt occasionally with Gentiles, mostly with the children of Judah. Um, but he had the kind of care and concern for other people that really should motivate our culture making. I think in the New Testament, you can't really find a cadre of artists, who are out there doing, primarily because the church had to be a very kind of secretive subculture, and they simply didn't have the wherewithal, the structures, the social structures, in order to create great art. Um, but once Christianity became more established, they certainly did, and I think we certainly have the resources now.
So, when you talk about great art, I guess that some of our listeners will immediately think of some of the art that they can find adorning churches and religious buildings in a place like Italy. But what you're talking about here is art in our society today. So that's things like films, music, computer games, all kinds of things like that. You draw on examples from all kinds of areas, Tolkien, for example, but you also talk in the book about different kinds of music and video games. Why should we engage with some of that stuff? Now, I appreciate some of our listeners will say, oh, we should completely avoid that kind of stuff. Why do you
Hmm.
think we should engage with it? And what does that look like in a practical context?
Okay, so in Oasis of Imagination, when I'm talking about cultural engagement, I'm actually saying get out there and do, or help resource the people who can do this well. That is the artists, the creatives. I wrote another book back in 2012, I think, called Popologetics, which is very much about how do you engage with, that is, interpret and speak back to non-Christian pieces of popular culture. So I think Christians are called to do both. If we if we say that we actually care about the world that is alienated from Christ, our neighbors, our friends, fellow students, fellow, coworkers, um, who don't know Christ, knowing their cultural context and being able to speak critically, uh, appreciatively, and creatively into their context is the way we show that we love them. Like it's not possible to hold everyone's culture at arm's length and say, yeah, but I really care for you. I think that shows a lack of integrity or awareness or something. I think it's much more helpful, and I'm not saying every piece of culture is worth engaging, right? There are things that are going to be beyond the pale morally for us, but I think a lot of Christians tend to make that very, very narrow. Anything that they don't agree with becomes off limits. Um, I, and I think that removes us from the cultural conversation. If we want to be part of the cultural conversation, if we want to engage people, then we have to engage the culture. And I think by contributing to the culture through creative works, by empowering creatives to do the work, by making good video games, making movies, making music, making paintings, making novels, whatever, uh, that's going to we have a place at the table if we choose to do something about it. We don't if we choose to retire and go into our living rooms and only listen to Christian music and only watch Christian programs and make sure that our children see nothing uh, but that which we consider pure as the driven snow, rather than equipping them to deal with the complexity and the mixtures of good and bad that they're going to find in the world once they leave home and go to uni.
Yeah, I think you raise a very good point there, and it's definitely something worth engaging with. Let's for a moment stay in the realm of video games, because I imagine that some of our listeners right now will have children or grandchildren that play video games and would like to be able to engage with them about some of the content. So I think about the youth work contexts I'm in and the games that the young people I work with really enjoy at the moment. So it's things like Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto is another very, very popular game. How can we use those games or learn from those games about where our society is at if we want to reach our young people with the gospel?
Mm. Well, I mean, the very first step, I suppose, um, is sitting down and watching kids play the games and having them talk you through the different mechanics of gameplay and why they enjoy the game and what sort of attraction does it hold, without falling into the trap of a quick and easy snap judgments about the moral character of either the players of the game or the game itself. It's a Once you're dealing with video games, you have to realize you're dealing with a realm of fantasy and make believe, and kids are aware of that. In Grand Theft Auto, when you steal a car, it does not mean that Bobby or Sally is going to go off and steal a car because they now think that's cool. it's a way of imaginatively exploring a space in a way that you probably wouldn't do yourself. Like when we read Frankenstein, we're not going to go try to rob graves and sew things together, right? It's an imaginative space for exploration. But still, there's stuff about that world of GTA, San Andreas. I don't have they gotten a new one yet? I
I
don't
have
think so.
absolutely no idea.
Okay.
San Andreas is the last one I've heard of.
Yeah. So in San Andreas, it's very much a dog eat dog world, fierce competition, moral compromise, and um, and I think that there are rooms for conversations if you're in for the ride. Like if I spent hours watching my son, who was an avid gamer, um, play. It wasn't Call of Duty. It was Counter-Strike, I think, back in the day. But watching him play, and then we would occasionally talk and have conversations about what he was doing. And I'm quite easily entertained by watching somebody who's good at video games play video games. I spent a good part of the 80s in arcades, not wasting my quarters, but watching other people who knew how to play go after these games, and I thought it was fascinating, and I still think it's fascinating. I think it's also I think it's very possible that some of these players, um, if they're really truly hardcore gamers, end up flipping that into a career and going to work at a game dev studio. And it's those kids that I would like to see nurtured in the faith and thinking about projects, maybe forming their own development studios in which they could make good Christian video games or good video games that have sort of Christian themes under the surface, um, which hasn't really happened a lot. Like there are a lot of cheesy, bad Christian video games. There are a few. Yeah, I mentioned one in the book, that Dragon Cancer, which is just a brilliant game made on a very low budget. But I'd love to see adults drawing alongside of students, of kids who are into these games, and just be there as without cramping their style necessarily, but being there as a witness, being there as a sounding board, being there to ask questions without being oppressive, if that makes any sense. Without being Big Brother.
It does. It does. I would love to take that point about the cheesy video games and move over as well into the realms of Christian movies. Now, please, if you make Christian movies, don't see this as a criticism, but I and some of my friends really struggle to engage with Christian movies. They're often made in America, and the Christian culture there is different to my experience of the Christian culture here in the UK. I often think when I watch these films that as Christians, we shouldn't want to accept second best. We should want our product to be as good as what the secular society is throwing out. Do you think that one of the reasons why sometimes our products aren't as good is just because we've failed for so many years to engage with culture?
Yes, I think that's key. I think that there was for a very long time, and in a lot of churches still is, um, if a kid in your church had some writing talent, or really was a good photographer or good camera person, or showed one of these skills that could translate into the film industry, they were fiercely discouraged of going into Hollywood because that's Sin City, and you're going to lose your faith. And this look. Let's be honest. Hollywood is not is in a lot of respects morally suspect. Like they put out some pretty horrible stuff. They also have the ability to put out very thoughtful things that Christians ought to be watching. Um, but again, if all we see is moral danger and red flags, such that we're holding our youth back from actually going to Hollywood or Manchester or the many spots where filmmaking happens in Britain, then you're going to or you keep them from going to film school because they're going to, you know, why can't you just be a doctor? Why can't you, why can't you go into the ministry? Then you're going to condemn your cultural voice to looking really bad. I think that's one problem. The other problem, and let me say, as an American, I apologize for the movies that we've inflicted on the rest of the Christian world. Um, it's not my fault personally, but I claim communal responsibility. But I think the other thing is that there is a feeling in America that if you're kind of pushing the right message, then you don't have to be top notch. Like as long as you're saying the right things through your movie, then you don't really have to care about shooting dialogue well, right? You can just kind of get by with something mediocre, and you've got a guaranteed audience because everybody will be there shaking, saying, yes, yes, this is good. Yes, I'm glad that there's a film out there that says what I believe. And what that does is it abdicates our responsibility for what film is really good at, which is asking questions and putting the viewer into a disturbing position where they really have to think through things and start provoked into self-reflection. And that's not something that we expect as Christians, we expect from films. And it's not something that that as general filmmaking, film watching audiences, we expect either. That's more, the cineast, the cinemaphile, the people who are looking for good movies. But those are the movies that people who love movies and may go into making movies, those are the ones that influence them. Those are the ones that steer them in the right direction. So I think we just love our propaganda in America, and that keeps us from making really fine movies. Um, and we love and we want to keep our youth safe, and therefore we keep them on the farm as much as we can so that they don't go off and lose their faith in Hollywood or something like that.
Ted Turnau, thank you so much for being with us on the programme today. Ted is the author of the book Oasis of Imagination. This is The Supplement. My next guest today is Niki Hardy, author, speaker, podcast host and self-described cancer thriver. After walking through profound loss, illness and church hurt, Niki has become a trusted voice for people navigating faith in the real world. Her latest book, God, Can We Chat?, offers a compassionate guide for anyone who feels like a doubting believer or a believing doubter. It's a book about honesty, hope, and discovering that God isn't threatened by our questions. Niki, it's a real pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you for being here. What was it that prompted you to write this book?
Well, as you said in your introduction, I'm someone I came to faith in my mid to late 20s, the first year that we were married. We were living in London, and I came to faith on an Alpha course, and it was a wonderful time. God was moving powerfully. We ditched our jobs and eventually went into ministry, planted a church here in America. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and that was difficult, moving our 3 kids over the pond, and church planting is never easy. And I had lost my mum and my sister to cancer, and then I went through cancer. But even through that, I had questions for God and kind of got angry with him at times and asked all the usual questions. But I still hung on somehow, and I still felt encouraged by my faith and close to God. But I remember coming through COVID, and, here in the US, COVID just threw up so much more. I mean, everyone in the congregations all over the place became an expert epidemiologist, they became politicians, they became everything. And the church at large was splitting and hemorrhaging, and the people of God were not looking like the people of God to the outside world. And I got so frustrated, so disillusioned, so disappointed. And I remember coming back from walking our dog Charlie, and I walked back inside our house, and my husband Al was sitting on the sofa, having his quiet time reading the Bible. And I kind of rolled my eyes with the maturity of a tween, because I'm like, oh, the world's falling apart and he can still, keep his faith. And the hymn Amazing Grace was playing over the speakers, and I remember going upstairs for a shower, and the words, I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. And I remember stopping halfway up the stairs and thinking, no, I once was found, but now I'm lost. And I thought, well, what am I? Am I deconstructing? Am I losing my faith? My faith is precious. God is special to me, but I had so many questions, and I was worried my faith was falling apart, almost dying by 1,000 paper cuts. And I knew that I needed to do something, and it felt like I was at the crossroads of doubt and faith. And rather than intellectually looking for answers, I thought, well, God, we need to talk about this, because something is very wrong. And I realized as time went by that I wasn't the only one, that there were an awful lot of people all over the place that were feeling like they were on the edges of either walking out of church or out of their faith, or just hanging on because that's what they do. And so I felt that there was a great need.
Did writing the book help you in your journey? Has it played a part in the healing process?
I think it did. Yes, I think writing is a very healing act in and of itself. There's a lot of scientific research about, journaling through trauma and stuff. And I wouldn't say I went through trauma, but writing my story and turning what I had learned into practical, actionable things that people can do, and a format for people to pray through, if you like. I offer a guided prayer format that helps us chat with God, because if you're anything like me, it's great to say, well, talk to God about it. And it's like, well, okay, well, what does that look like? And how do I do it? And how do I hear his voice? And, all those kind of things. So actually turning it into something practical and solidifying what I had learned made me go, oh, wow, yes, this is something that has really helped me and grown my faith and drawn me closer back to God. And realizing that our doubts and our questions, they are powerful, but not to destroy our faith, to actually draw us closer to God. And I was like, oh my goodness, our questions are our faith's superpower, not its kryptonite. That is mind-blowing.
I think that's interesting, actually. You make a good point, because when we doubt, it does encourage us, if we go about it the right way, to meditate on God's word and consider what the Bible might have to say about our doubts. I wonder, from your perspective, what was the biggest doubt that brought you back to God?
I think one of my biggest questions was, and disappointments, was about the people of God. Here in America, we had race riots, we had January 6th, and a lot of that, especially on January 6th, people were holding aloft signs saying they were professing faith. And that just was so soul destroying for me. And just taking that to God and not really getting an answer, not getting a clear kind of, oh, well, those people aren't with me kind of answer, which would have been terribly nice, but more a sense of his love and his his grace and his compassion, and for me and for everyone, was super helpful, and just helping me come back and ever so slowly fall back in love with the church.
I've had a few difficult moments in my Christian life. I have been known to say on a couple of occasions, tongue in cheek, of course, that the Christian journey would be a lot easier without other Christians. But I only ever say that tongue in cheek, but it can be difficult sometimes. And I think there's this extra pressure, isn't there, to hold each other to account, but sometimes we don't want to hear the advice, sometimes they don't want to hear the advice. And I think that just adds to everything.
Exactly. And wasn't it Gandhi who said, I like your Christ, I just don't like your Christians.
Interesting point for us to reflect on. So in the book, you talk about what it's like for us to have honest conversations with God. So let's just talk to anybody who might never have had an honest conversation with God. What does that look like?
Well, for me, it starts with this reimagining our doubts and our questions as this superpower, that it's not something that's going to destroy our faith, that God is not fazed by anything we think or ask. I mean, we just need to have a quick romp through the Bible, and it's pretty much all been asked and screamed at God before. And the second thing is to reframe all the lies and the doubts and the things that come to us about why we shouldn't go to God. Well, he's God and I'm just little old me, or, well, I can't tell God that, or I'm the only one. And all these thoughts just stop us having that honest conversation. And when we can flip those on their heads and realize what's really true, that loads of people are doubting and God's not fazed by our doubts and he wants us to come to him, all those kind of things, then we're free to have this honest conversation. And that looks like really showing up and saying, this is what happened and this is how I'm feeling. And that's where that guided prayer format comes in, and it uses the acronym CHAT to be super helpful, but it really helps us guide through digging into what's really going on, because you can say, well, this happened, or for me it could be, my sister died of cancer when she was just 43. But then it's like, well, what's the story behind that? What is the story I'm telling myself? Well, I didn't pray hard enough. God didn't love her. There's a story behind the incident, if you like. And digging into that in that first part of that guided prayer format that I offer, I think can really help us unpack what's really going on and get to the really honest part of the conversation.
If we're going to have honest conversations with God, then I guess the next obvious question is that we would hope to have an honest response from God. So let's speak to somebody right now. It's a situation I've been in. I'm sure many people will have been there. Sitting in a waiting room, numerous waiting rooms, waiting for what they know is going to be a difficult diagnosis or a difficult treatment. If the prayers are hitting a brick wall and you're not hearing anything back, what then do you do?
Yeah. Well, I think I've been there. I've sat, with my mum. I've sat with my sister, and I've sat in those chairs myself and prayed many prayers that feel like they're hitting a brick wall. And what I think I can confidently say, looking back, is they're not. God hears every single prayer. And when we don't hear anything, it's either that he's not actually saying anything right at that moment, or we're just not in a place to hear it. But I want to encourage those people sitting where I've sat, that God sees you, he hears you, he knows your heart, and he is holding you, even though we can't feel it. I mean, that's the annoying thing about God. He doesn't have skin on, so he's not tangible. But it's really hard when we feel like God's on mute, that he's turned the volume down or something. But then I think one of the key things is to look for ways that he might be speaking that aren't the normal ways, like the tenderness of an oncology nurse who's, setting up your IV. I mean, that is just God's touch right there. Or it might be somebody else, or lots of different things, but I know that I can get God needs to speak to me in this certain way, and I need to hear it in my head. But then actually, when I don't hear, if I look up and look at unexpected ways that he's speaking and moving, I go, oh, there he is. There he is.
Yeah, I think that's really, really useful. Let's move on to the next part of the conversation. How can churches create a space where doubts can be more easily explored? I've been to some churches that do this well, but I've also been to some churches where if you express a doubt, they immediately presume you're on the exit road out. How would you like to see churches handle this better?
I believe that creating a culture where questions and doubts and mystery are all part and parcel of the Christian walk is really important. And that isn't just one space within the church, that is a church culture where whoever's speaking at the front might say, we just don't know about this, or I struggle with this. And being honest and open from the front, maybe having groups and places to come and chat as well. Do the book. I mean, there's a group study. There's all sorts of different ways. But I think it's less about creating one specific space, because then those of us with questions think, oh, well, we've got to go to that class for doubters. We're off in detention. But if we come to a space where it's like, come and all our questions are welcome, and this is a place where we walk in faith, and mystery is part and parcel of the Christian journey and our relationship with God, then we feel so much safer.
And what advice would you give to those of us who end up facing some of these questions on behalf of someone that's struggling? What are the most useful ways that we can respond? I tend to be a little bit like Job's friends, not the good part of Job's friends where I shut up and listen, the bad bit where I try to offer bad advice. So what advice would you offer us about how we can respond to people's questions, especially when they're hurting?
It's such a good question because, like you say, we can be really tempted to dive in with answers. And a lot of times our church upbringing, if you like, is so focused on apologetics and having answers that we feel we have to answer. But just sitting and acknowledging, wow, that's a really good question. I struggle with that too. Can be really helpful. Also, what can be helpful is to, rather than give a theological answer, because I know, when my sister was dying, if somebody had given me a theological exegesis on why suffering happens, I might have punched them. But if they had said, this is really hard, and, we don't really understand it, there is a theological answer, but what we do know is God is here, and God wants to hear you, and God wants to be with you. That is so much more loving, and offering, like you say, the ministry of presence, and just, I'm here, happy to chat it through with you. I know God wants to talk to you about it, but keep asking.
Well, Niki Hardy, thank you so much for being with us on the programme today. Her book is called God, Can We Chat? Earlier on, we heard from Ted Turnau. His new book is called Oasis of Imagination. And back at the start of the programme today, we heard from Andy Robinson, author of the book The Big C in Me. Thank you so much for being with us on today's episode of The Supplement. If you'd like to listen to this programme again or share the link with a friend, you can do that when you head over to our website at twr.org.uk/on-demand. We also put up some of our latest interviews on the YouTube channel. We're planning on uploading that interview at the start of our programme today with Andy Robinson. We'll probably put the Niki Hardy interview up as well. So if you want to see those, then just go to youtube.com/TWR-UK. And if you enjoy any of the videos that we put up there, then please do consider subscribing to our channel and liking any of the videos that you enjoy, because that does enable us to be seen by more people. I'll be back at the same time next weekend with another episode of The Supplement on TWR UK. This podcast is a production of Transworld Radio UK. For more information, go to our website at twr.org.uk.